Prologue. The unlikely encounter. Rain hammered the clinic's roof like an unrelenting drumbeat, punctuating the silence of a bitter winter night. In the midst of that harsh symphony, a voice emerged, low, rough, and reluctant. "I don't need your help." These were the first words that shattered the quiet, drawing a stark line between necessity and defiance. The room, shrouded in the pale glow of an old lamp, bore witness to a scene as unsettling as it was unexpected. Blood, not yet dried, spoke of a desperate struggle, and yet beneath its harsh scarlet testimony lay a mystery that beckoned like a forbidden secret. Standing in the doorway of the small, sterile clinic was Sarapen, a woman as resolute as she was determined. Her gloved hands pressed firmly against a deep wound along a stranger's shoulder, a wound that defied the natural order of healing. The air, heavy with the tang of antiseptic, mingled with the metallic scent of fresh blood, crafting an atmosphere both clinical and raw. With every measured motion, Sarapen exuded an authority that could only be earned through years of hardened experience and unspoken battles fought in isolation. Across from her, the stranger's eyes shimmered with a fleeting glow, a glimmer of gold that cut through the dim light like a hidden promise. His features, rugged and marred by the ruthless hand of fate, told tales of pain and perseverance. He slumped in the worn-out chair like a warrior cast down by his adversaries, his body betraying the immense strength that pulsed just beneath the surface. Even as his skin lay pale and vulnerable from loss, there was an almost magnetic allure to the stubborn defiance that lingered in his gaze. "Look," Sarapen said sharply, her tone a blend of irritation and careful concern. "You should have stayed right there." Her words, though brisk, carried an undercurrent of both empathy and challenge. It was as if each syllable demanded an explanation, a reason behind the blood, behind the reckless plunge into her sanctuary. The ticking of the wall clock provided a metronomic counterpoint to their silent standoff, each tick echoing the relentless passage of time in this frozen, forgotten corner of the world. Outside, the winter wind roared like a beast, its icy claws testing the resolve of every living thing. The harsh chill seeped through the walls, a constant reminder of the isolation they faced. Within the confines of the clinic, the contrast between the sterile order and the chaotic burst of raw emotion was palpable. As Sarapen deftly applied fresh dressing to the jagged wound, a subtle battle waged beneath her calm exterior, a war between the rational mind and the growing awareness that something was not quite right. There was an instinctive curiosity in the way she scrutinized his injury, a blend of professional precision and an unspoken need to understand the truth behind his survival. "This isn't the result of a simple accident," she murmured, her voice softened by both concern and skepticism. The wound, running in a jagged line across his shoulder and dipping dangerously close to his collarbone, seemed almost too severe yet bafflingly resilient in its rapid healing. Such contradictions ignited a spark of questioning that could not be easily quelled. For a long moment, their eyes locked in a silent, wordless duel, a duel where emotions flared brighter than the storm outside. His gaze, laden with equal parts, defiance and a hidden vulnerability, hinted at secrets long buried, stories that might never be fully revealed. There was something magnetic about that unresolved past, a past that seemed to pull both of them toward a destiny neither could predict. His admission was quiet, almost reluctant. "I heal fast." In that fleeting pause, as the storm thrashed against the clinic's thin walls, the two established an unspoken accord. Despite the chill and the evident wounds, both physical and emotional, the encounter took on an unexpected intimacy. The strange man, battered but unbroken, became more than just an injured soul. He was a living riddle, a conundrum wrapped in layers of mystery and silent pain. Every heartbeat between them resonated like the tolling of a bell that signaled the beginning of something far more profound than an ordinary night in a remote town. The isolation of that cold night, the relentless pounding of the storm, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow within the clinic created a setting where every sound and every pause was charged with meaning. It was a moment suspended in time, a fragile instance where survival, defiance, and the faint glimmer of hope converged. Each droplet of rain, each echoing tick of the clock, and every whispered word contributed to a tableau vivant, a cinematic portrait of human resilience and the quiet, desperate search for truth. As the conversation ebbed and flowed between practical necessity and hushed confessions, an undercurrent of internal struggle simmered beneath the surface. Sarapen's steady hands and clinical detachment could not mask the restless questions that now stirred within her, a need to discern who this man was, what adversities he'd endured, and why fate had led him to her door on this inhospitable night. In that moment, caught between the relentless outside world and the fragile sanctuary of the clinic, the stage was set for an encounter that promised to unravel not just wounds of the flesh, but scars etched deep within the soul. It was an encounter that would blur the lines between salvation and surrender, between the cold grip of inevitability and the fierce, pulsing spark of hope. And as the storm continued to rage beyond, the unspoken promise of new beginnings lingered. Establishing stakes, wound, words, and tension. The rhythmic tick of the wall clock filled the sterile clinic, punctuating the tension that had silently thickened in the wake of their initial exchange. The soft, almost ghostly hiss of the aging heater mingled with the ambient sound, as if it too were whispering secrets of the night. Sarapen knelt beside the man, her eyes fixed on the deep, jagged wound that marred his shoulder. A wound that told its own grim story through every raw, oozing edge. Her gloved fingers moved with practiced precision over the injured skin, gently pressing against the swelling flesh. The cut was severe, a ragged slash that arced from the shoulder down toward his collarbone. Yet remarkably, the wound bore signs of healing that defied logic. The edges had begun to knit together at an unnaturally rapid pace, as if his body were working overtime to mend itself. Each careful touch of the gauze revealed a surprising resilience lurking beneath the pale surface. The stark smell of blood, sharp and metallic, intermingled with the sterile antiseptic tang, creating an almost hypnotic sensory blend that both repelled and intrigued her. He sat there in quiet stoicism, his face a mask of determination, despite the evident pain that should have betrayed him. His body, though wounded, radiated a muted strength, an inner fortitude that made it seem almost as if he were challenging fate itself. There was no quiver in his lips as he silently accepted her ministrations. Instead, his eyes remained fixed, seemingly distant as if deep in thought about secrets he wouldn't share. In that stillness, his defiance contrasted starkly with the simmering frustration on Sarapen's features. "Sit still," she demanded, her tone a firm balance of command and concern. Her irritation was palpable. Each word was edged with exasperation, at the necessity of revisiting questions she had no intention of asking. The cool breeze from the heater brushed intermittently against her skin, a subtle reminder of the winter's bite encroaching from outside. Within this confined space, each sound, the relentless ticking, the occasional groan of the old building, and even their measured breaths, became an integral part of their charged interaction. As she wiped away excess blood with a steady hand, Sarapen's gaze briefly flickered to the man's face. His eyes, the very same that had hinted at hidden depths during their initial meeting, now held a mysterious glint that seemed to defy the horror of the moment. That glimmer of gold was like a silent promise of untold stories, something buried in the shadowy crevices of his past. And yet, as if determined to maintain a semblance of normalcy, he remained frustratingly reticent, a living puzzle whose fragments of truth were scattered amid the chaos of the present. Her mind raced with questions she dared not voice aloud. What fight had left him so gravely wounded? Was it a brutal encounter with human malice, or had something darker taken place? The ambiguity of the injury's cause was deliberate, leaving only the echo of a painful mystery behind him. Every so often, She would press a little harder against the fabric of his shirt, trying to coax out any sign of confession, only to be met with an impenetrable silence. His refusal to allow every detail of the encounter was meticulously etched into the scene. The microsecond pause between her commands and his compliance. The almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth when he heard her words. The way the cold, clinical environment clashed with the fiery undercurrent of their unspoken history. It was as if the very air was charged with potential energy. A suspense so palpable that even the simple act of cleaning a wound became a dramatic ritual. Every movement laden with hidden meaning. The sharp, almost clinical scent of the blood was a constant reminder of both vulnerability and raw power. It was a scent that spoke of mortality and survival, of battles fought in the darkness where the true cost of life was measured in moments of pain and defiance. As Sarapen continued to work, her hands steady and sure, the echo of that ticking clock seemed to count down the seconds until the inevitable unraveling of more than just physical wounds, a gradual peeling back of layers hiding a turbulent past. In that moment, as she pressed a fresh piece of gauze against his shoulder, her eyes locked with his in silent communication. There was a challenge in her gaze, a demand for answers that went far beyond the necessity of physical healing. Yet the man offered only a curt nod, as if acknowledging a truth too vast to share in fragments. The ambiguity of his silence was an invitation and a warning all at once, a promise that his past was a labyrinth of pain and secrets from which even he might not fully escape. The clinic, with its cold light and harsh sounds, had become a crucible where more than just flesh was being mended. It was here that hidden stories began to emerge at the edges of conversation. A tale of survival, inner turmoil, and the ceaseless struggle against forces both seen and unseen. And as Sarapen worked, her mind teetered on the brink of revelations, too dangerous to explore fully, each moment drawing her. The silent agreement, a fragile truce, the tension in the clinic shifted subtly as Sarapen's clinical urgency morphed into a silent command. With a steady hand and firm tone, she declared, "You're not leaving until I'm done here." Her words carried an unmistakable authority that brooked no argument. In that charged atmosphere, the only sound aside from the persistent ticking of the clock was the soft rustle of her gloved fingers as they worked, and the measured, almost imperceptible exhale from him. A sound that seemed to say, "I understand." He sat there, his posture stiff yet unwavering, as if bracing himself against an inner storm. His eyes, still holding that flicker of enigmatic gold, remained unreadable, a mirror to his inner resolve and the secrets he was determined to keep hidden. His responses were few, each word barely more than a murmur, reinforcing a silence that spoke volumes. When, after a long pause, he finally uttered in a tone so matter-of-fact it bordered on indifference, "I heal fast." It was as if he was stating a fact too immense to contest. Sarapen's skeptical gaze bore into him, challenging the simplicity of those words. She had seen wounds that defied nature, healing at a pace no human body should manage. Yet, something in his unwavering calm and unyielding quiet told her that there was more behind his brief remark. "I see," she replied coolly, her tone laced with both professional inquiry and personal distrust. It was a quiet power play, a delicate negotiation where every word and every pause built an unspoken truce. Around them, the clinic seemed to hold its breath. The constant tick of the wall clock and the low, steady hum of the heater formed a backdrop to this intricate interplay. Sarapen resumed her work with the gauze, her fingers methodical in their movements, as if each careful press against his wound was an act of both healing and an interrogation. She pressed the pad against the cut with deliberate precision, her eyes never leaving his. Every so often, a flicker of frustration would cross her face, a silent admonition that she was not merely treating an injury, but unraveling a mystery that refused to reveal itself. In that silence, the power dynamics were keenly evident. He offered neither protest nor further explanation. His silence was almost a defiant choice, punctuated only by that simple declaration. It was as if he was trying to convey that his life, his very nature, was defined by this unusual condition, a state of perpetual defiance against what the world expected. And yet, his body, battered and wounded, was already displaying inexplicable signs of recovery. The edges of the gash had already begun to knit together, defying the natural law of time, a physical testament to the secret power he harbored. Sarapen's mind raced with a myriad of questions, even as she continued to treat him. Why, she wondered, would such a man, so clearly burdened with more than just physical scars, claim such effortless resilience? Was it pride, a coping mechanism, or was it the sheer force of something far more extraordinary that controlled him from within? Each question hung heavy in the air, yet he remained taciturn, his measured silence revealing nothing more than his commitment to endure. In his quiet acceptance of her authority, there lurked. For her part, Sarapen was a woman of determined action. She had built her existence on the principles of clarity and order, and yet here, in the intimate confines of a storm-battered clinic, she found herself immersed in ambiguity. It was a dangerous cocktail of professional detachment and personal curiosity. In her eyes, the unyielding quality of his voice, and that single potent phrase, "I heal fast," was a challenge, a cryptic clue to a puzzle that she was both drawn to and wary of. Every measured move, every deliberate pause in her treatment, was a silent demand for accountability. The air between them pulsed with a fragile, unstable energy. Although he spoke little, his minimal responses were loaded with implications, while her every word and action sought to extract and decipher their hidden meanings. This fragile truce, born of necessity and mutual recognition of each other's strengths, had bound them together in this shared moment of vulnerability. Neither fully trusted the other, but both understood that survival depended on this uneasy alliance. In that charged silence, the storm outside persisted as a reminder of the chaotic world beyond, the cold indifference of nature, juxtaposed with the rich tapestry of human frailty and resilience inside the clinic. The quiet determination in Sarapen's eyes clashed with the inscrutable calm of his demeanor. Though words were few and sparse, every heartbeat, every exhaled breath echoed with an underlying promise that despite the wound, despite the unspoken questions, they would see this through together. Thus, in the narrow confines of that winter night, an unspoken agreement was forged, a fragile truce where both parties acknowledged their dependence on one another, a mutual recognition that the truth of his unusual healing and the shadows of his past. First glimpse of the mystery, unspoken vulnerability. As Sarapen worked methodically on the stranger's wound, something about his eyes captured her attention. A fleeting glimmer of gold that danced like a secret flame beneath the surface of his stormy gaze. In the soft, flickering light of the clinic, those eyes seemed to hold a story far larger than the simple truth of his injuries. For a moment, the clinical detachment in her practiced hands faltered under the weight of her own internal stirrings. There was an ineffable depth there, a hidden vulnerability that both beckoned and warned against delving too deep. Her mind raced with questions as she dabbed gently around the jagged cut, each press of the sterile gauze an unintentional invitation to explore the enigma before her. Who was this man who could claim such rapid healing and yet carry wounds that whispered of past battles too painful to recount? The golden glimmer in his eyes was at odds with the harsh lines of defiance etched on his face, a contradiction that left her both fascinated and unsettled. It was as if behind that cool, measured composure lay a well of emotion, vulnerable and unguarded, waiting for an empathetic touch, or perhaps a sympathetic ear. The interplay of light and shadow on his features, highlighted by the dim lamp, lent him an almost ethereal quality. One could almost see the tender vulnerability lurking in the corners of his eyes, moments before it was swept away by his habitual reserve. In that brief lapse, a blink, a subtle narrowing of the gaze, Sarapen found herself wondering if he sometimes let his guard down, if for a split second he allowed a glimpse of the fragility beneath the hardened exterior. The notion both piqued her curiosity and stirred a quiet disquiet within her heart. She couldn't help but wonder what untold stories that glimmer of gold might hold. Memories of loss, battles fought in silence, or an inner pain that no one else had the courage to see. Each time she met his eyes while tending to his wound, the moment felt charged with an almost magnetic tension. Her steady, professional tone fell away into a silent dialogue, a wordless conversation filled with tentative admissions that neither dared fully voice. In those precious seconds, the clinical and the personal merged, evoking a delicate balance between duty and a deep, unspoken empathy. That vulnerability, however fleeting, challenged her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about strength. It was a soft vulnerability that belied his stoic posture, a secret that teased at the edges of his carefully constructed armor. Sarapen's internal reaction was not one of simple professional concern, but a stirring awareness that she was encountering more than just an injured man. His mysterious resilience and the subtle, golden gleam in his eyes spoke of hidden depths and an untold past that might be as beautiful as it was tragic. She recalled fragments of her own experiences, those moments when her inner self had trembled before the enormity of life's raw truths, and recognized a parallel in the quiet desperation etched in his gaze. It was a poignant reminder. While her hands continued the careful task of cleaning and dressing the wound, her mind churned with possibilities. Perhaps his unusual healing was not simply a quirk of nature, but a sign of something supernatural, a secret power or a curse, entwined with the lore of creatures that roam the shadows of folklore. That thought sent a shiver through her, mixing apprehension with a deep, unbidden desire to understand him. The mere notion was as dangerous as it was compelling, and every time she caught that golden glimmer, it was as though he was silently daring her to unravel the mystery of his existence. In that silent communion, their unspoken vulnerability began to forge a fragile connection between them. Despite his minimal responses and guarded reserve, there was a mutual acknowledgement of each other's scars, visible and invisible. His lack of words was a canvas onto which her own curiosity and empathy were vividly painted. For a fleeting moment, the clinical coldness of the room was transformed into a sacred space, where the quiet truths of their souls could almost be heard between the soft hum of the heater and the persistent, unyielding tick of the clock. Yet, even as she allowed herself to be drawn into the depths of his silent mystery, Sarapen remained cautious. She knew that every truth revealed carried with it the risk of exposure, of unleashing forces she might not be prepared to face. But the allure of that golden light, so subtle yet so profound, stirred something within her, a spark of kinship and an irresistible urge to see beyond the exterior. The balance between professional detachment and personal involvement wavered, precariously, leaving her both inspired and wary of the secrets that lay dormant in his eyes. In that charged atmosphere, every small gesture, a soft exhale, a lingering look, the gentle touch of her fingertips, became a silent vow. For now, it was enough to simply acknowledge the unspoken vulnerability they both carried. The mystery of his identity, hinted at in that delicate flicker of light, would remain cloaked for a while longer, preserved in the quiet spaces between their interactions. And so, amid the steady ticking of time and the echo of unvoiced questions, they embarked on an uneasy truce. The Intrusion, a storm of questions. Outside the clinic's fortified walls, the wind howled like an unruly chorus of unseen voices, its bitter gusts carrying with them whispers that threatened to invade the fragile peace within. As Sarapen, worked diligently over the mysterious man's slowly healing wound, the door creaked open, a subtle yet insistent reminder of the world beyond the sterile sanctuary. That creak unraveled a cascade of questions, echoing in the sterile air like a storm of interrogation. In a flash, a murmur of his arrival slid into her thoughts, a brief, haunting recollection of the night he had first appeared on her doorstep. It had been a tempest much like this, where the chill of the winter and the fury of the storm conspired to reveal the raw underbelly of human desperation. She remembered the moment he collapsed at her door, blood pooling at his feet, and his eyes holding that eerie, golden glimmer. The memory flashed across her mind with unbidden clarity, a montage of fear, defiance, and an inexplicable vulnerability. Yet even then, her pragmatic instincts had wrestled with an unspoken curiosity about the man whose presence defied everything she had ever known. Now, as shadows danced across the room, Sarapen's gaze hardened with a mix of sarcasm and probing, determination. "So," she began, her voice laced with dry wit and caution, "you decide to show up at my clinic after what must have been one hell of a night?" Her words danced around the raw edges of their shared tension, a defiant challenge to the uncertainty of his past. It wasn't simply an inquiry about his condition, but a relentless quest to unravel the motives behind his unexpected arrival. The Corsin man, still seated with a stoic calm that bordered on indifference, offered only a slight, enigmatic shrug, as if burdened by secrets too heavy to share. His eyes, dark and introspective, flickered momentarily with a spark that hinted at untold stories, a silent admission of a past filled with both valor and perhaps regret. Yet his reply was terse, dismissing the question with the same guarded minimalism that had characterized his every word since their first encounter. "It wasn't planned," he murmured, almost as though the admission of any intention would unravel his carefully maintained veil of mystery. Seraphi's lips twitched in a wry, almost bitter smile. "Not planned, huh? That sounds awfully convenient, for someone who appears to have the miracle of healing at his side." Her tone, though cloaked in sarcasm, carried a probing intensity. Every raised eyebrow, every slight tilt of her head, seemed designed to coax out more than he cared to reveal. The interplay of her inquisitive gaze and his fleeting, guarded expressions created a charged exchange, a silent duel where words were both shield and sword. In that moment, their expressions spoke volumes even when their voices receded into the background. Sarapen's eyes, sharp and unyielding, never left his face, as if scanning for the slightest hint of the truth. Meanwhile, the man's posture remained impeccably still, yet subtle micro-expressions betrayed an inner conflict. His jaw tightened ever so slightly with each of her barbed remarks, and the golden flicker in his eyes sometimes widened, as if it were a brief window into a past he desperately wished to keep locked away. Every sound in the room, the incessant ticking of the clock, the soft hiss of the heater, even the faint, almost imperceptible tapping of rain against the windows, added layers of drama to the unfolding confrontation. It was as if the clinic itself had become a stage, a place where every element of nature conspired to heighten the tension between them. Shadows lengthened and merged with the half-light, blending the With deliberate precision, Sarapen leaned forward, her gaze narrowing in a way that left no room for evasions. "Tell me," she pressed, her voice dropping to a measured cadence that resonated against the silent backdrop of the room. "What exactly happened out there that left you like this?" The question hung in the air, thick with implication and unspoken accusation, a challenge to reconcile the man before her with the unlikely hero of a story she could hardly begin to fathom. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them, punctuated only by the sterile sounds of the clinic. His eyes, dark and restless, darted briefly to the floor before returning to her unwavering stare. Finally, in a voice so quiet it almost mingled with the ambient hum of the room, he replied, "I was ambushed." Those two simple words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken memories, hinting at a maelstrom of pain and conflict that lay hidden beneath his unyielding exterior. The admission did little to quell her barrage of thoughts. Sarapen felt a surge of defiant empathy, a mix of professional duty and personal intrigue that refused to be subdued. "Ambushed?" she echoed, her voice both skeptical and laced with a dangerous curiosity. "By whom? What did you encounter that could leave you—" Her sentence faltered, trapped between the desire for clarity and the realization that some questions might invoke truths best left unspoken. His reply, curt and measured, deepened the veil of mystery. "Men," he stated simply, as though the explanation were as commonplace as a fall from a horse. Yet, the stark understatement of his answer only magnified the gravity of the situation, leaving Sarapen to grapple with the dangerous implications that lurked behind his sparse words. In that fraught atmosphere, the intrusion of the outside world was felt more acutely, a relentless storm of questions that had now permeated their shared space. The collision of her probing dialogue and his reticent replies created a palpable tension, a fragile balance between defiance and vulnerability. Their interplay, charged with raw emotion and unspoken history, set the stage for revelations yet to be unraveled, a labyrinth of secrets that beckoned. The rules, setting boundaries. The chill of the winter night seeped in as the clinic's door closed with a definitive thud, sealing them within a temporary fortress of solitude. The quiet atmosphere crackled with tension as Sarapen fixed, her steely eyes on the injured stranger, her tone firm and resolute. "You're not leaving until I'm done," she declared, her voice echoing like a command in the sterile room. Every word carried an unyielding authority, leaving little room for negotiation. His response was immediate yet subdued. A slight nod, a subtle inclination of his head that betrayed cool compliance, mixed with a trace of intrigue. For Sarapen, setting these boundaries was more than a professional necessity. It was a personal mandate. With every precise movement, as she applied fresh dressing to his wound, she reaffirmed the rule. "No exceptions," she added, with a playful lilt barely masking the seriousness of her tone. The interplay of her commanding presence and his quiet acquiescence established a delicate, unspoken truce, a boundary that separated the chaotic world outside from their controlled little universe inside. Their conversation soon turned into a dance of sharp, witty banter. "You must really love clinging to life," she teased, her tone light, but edged with unmistakable authority. Her remark, though laced with sarcasm, held a curious undertone, an invitation for him to reveal a scrap of truth behind his enigmatic silence. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smirk, as if acknowledging both the compliment and the challenge embedded in her words. "I prefer to think of it as efficiency," he replied coolly. The brief exchange, effortless yet charged, only deepened the mystery of his existence. It was a moment when humor met tension, a glimpse into a power dynamic defined by mutual respect and cautious defiance. Amid this verbal sparring, Sarapen's mind raced. Every clever retort and measured pause in his responses hinted at secrets untold, stories locked away behind those stormy eyes. "You know," she continued with a playful arch of her eyebrow, "you're not exactly following the proper protocol for surviving a bloody ambush." Her words were both an observation and a challenge, a test of how much he was willing to share without compromising his carefully constructed persona. He kept his expression unchanged. Yet the faint tightening of his jaw betrayed the internal conflict that his cool exterior tried desperately to mask. The room filled with the quiet hum of the heater and the unrelenting tick of the clock, each sound reinforcing the unyielding structure Sarapen was determined to uphold. "Under my roof, you abide by my rules," she stated clearly, as she methodically adjusted the gauze to cover his wound. "No wandering off without telling me. No collapsing in the cold without proper treatment, and certainly no sneaking, away like some ghost. Her voice carried the weight of finality. The strictness of her words stood in stark contrast with the frailty of his condition, a living paradox who had arrived battered. Despite the firm boundary she set, a subtle spark of defiant humor glimmered in his eyes. "Not a typical patient, I see," he murmured, drawing a parallel between his unusual circumstance and her unyielding rules. His calm compliance was the unspoken acknowledgement that these rules, though seemingly inflexible, were the only safe harbor in a night as unforgiving as this one. The rules she was imposing were not arbitrary. They were the product of years honing her instincts to protect the vulnerable, even if that vulnerability sometimes manifested in the most unexpected forms. Their banter flowed effortlessly, a verbal tug-of-war that balanced on the knife edge, between control and mystery. Each quip and every careful declaration of boundaries only invited further questions about his past. Was his compliance an acceptance of her authority, or a strategic move to shield the secrets he carried? His terse responses, punctuated by the occasional subtle smirk, left her with a deeper, unresolved curiosity. In the flickering light of the old clinic lamp, the contrast of their attitudes, her rigid insistence on order and his enigmatic acceptance, formed a tableau of tension and tentative trust. "As long as you're under my care, you follow my rules," Sarapen said, her tone softening ever so slightly, as if hinting that beneath the stern veneer lay genuine concern. "This isn't merely about treating a wound. It's about ensuring you don't vanish into the night, lost to whatever demons you're running from." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications and the promise of more revelations yet to come. The dramatic irony was palpable. A wounded man whose very survival defied nature now found himself tethered to a woman whose own inner strength was the only thing standing between him and the perilous unknown. In that shared space, every gesture, every well-chosen word, reinforced the fragile truce that had been forged between them. The boundaries were set, the roles defined. A keeper of order and a bearer of hidden scars, navigating a realm where survival was the only currency. As the relentless storm raged outside, it was within these walls, punctuated by a silence laden, with as much promise as danger. Blood and secrets. The healing miracle. In the sterile half-light of the clinic, every detail of the man's wound seemed to defy nature's laws. Sarapen's trained eyes scrutinized the ragged laceration that marred his shoulder. A deep, uneven/that against all logic was already showing signs of rapid recovery. The edges of the wound, once raw and oozing, now appeared to be knitting together with a speed that both fascinated and unsettled her. The surface of his skin, pale and bruised, bore the faintest trace of a shimmer that hinted at something far, beyond the realm of human biology, a supernatural glint that played quietly along the contours of his flesh. Every measured motion of her gloved hands across the injury was laced with an almost reverential precision. As she applied a fresh bandage, the cool touch of the antiseptic mingled with the warmer scent of his blood, a heady mix that made her heart flutter in a strange, discordant rhythm. The metallic tang, sharp and unmistakable, provided a visceral counterpoint to the inexplicable progress of his healing. It was as if his body had accessed some hidden reserve of energy, a secret power that allowed life to persist, even when nature declared defeat. Her rational mind insisted that such rapid healing was impossible, and yet, in that very moment, the evidence before her eyes was undeniable. The once gaping wound had begun to close, the skin curling inward in a pattern that mimicked both art and advanced biology, a visual riddle that defied medical science. Sarapen's internal conflict raged quietly as she struggled to reconcile her clinical training with the surreal spectacle playing out in front of her. Every logical explanation she had ever known seemed to slip away like water through her fingers, replaced by a dawning suspicion of forces beyond the natural order. The light from the old lamp flickered softly, casting ever-shifting shadows that, danced on his recovering skin and deepening the sense of the mysterious. In that shifting play of shadow and light, she could almost imagine that the very essence of life was being rewritten upon his body, an alchemy of blood and magic. The sight was hauntingly beautiful, and yet it carried an undercurrent of peril. For every miracle of healing lay intertwined with secrets that might be too dangerous to unveil. Her thoughts raced as she tried to piece together what she was witnessing. Was it a genetic anomaly, a previously unknown medical phenomenon, or something entirely otherworldly? The whisper of ancient lore, the kind that spoke of curses and blessings, of transformations and forbidden powers, echoed faintly in the recesses of her mind. Each time she met his eye, there flickered a subtle light, as if he held a piece of that ancient mystery, silently challenging her to understand him, to decipher the hidden language written upon his skin. Despite her deep-seated skepticism, Sarapen could not help but feel drawn to the enigma before her. Every inch of his healing wound told a story of survival, pain, and possibly redemption. It was as though the physical act of healing was a metaphor for a much deeper repair occurring within him, a patching of not only flesh but also a fractured soul. As her fingers moved with methodical care, she felt a tug of empathy, mingled with the professional need to document this phenomenon. The miraculous pace of his recovery was both an awe-inspiring marvel and her heart pounded with both trepidation and a strange, hopeful excitement. The more she examined the wound, the more she was forced to confront the possibility that everything she believed about life and death was shifting on a subtle, almost imperceptible axis. This healing miracle was not merely a physical phenomenon. It was a clue, a cryptic marker hinting at a destiny that defied conventional understanding. Every detail, down to the faint glisten of his recovering skin, spoke of a potential that transcended ordinary human limits. The room seemed to shrink around them as the dense silence took over, punctuated only by the steady tick of the clock and the soft hum of the heater. In that stillness, the rapid healing of his wound became a focal point, a silent testament to the unknown. Sarapen's mind, ever the bastion of science and reason, now danced perilously close to the edge of belief. Was it possible that she was witnessing something supernatural? Did this man's affliction, coupled with his uncanny ability to mend, conceal a truth that could reshape her understanding of human resilience? In this moment of marvel and uncertainty, her internal struggle deepened. The clinical detachment that had once defined her was now infiltrated by a stirring of emotions, a blend of professional curiosity, personal concern, and a hint of something altogether more profound, an unspoken promise of revelation. As she secured the final bandage around his shoulder, the miracle of his healing was seared into her memory, a riddle wrapped in blood and light. And in the quiet aftermath, she realized that uncovering his secrets might demand more than medical expertise. Identity revealed, naming the enigma. In the subdued hush of the clinic, the charged silence between them began to waver, revealing an unexpected vulnerability in their guarded exchange. As Sarapen carefully wrapped the final bandage around his recovering shoulder, the steady hum of the clock seemed to accelerate, urging them toward a pivotal moment. The tension in the air was palpable, a delicate balance of necessity, defiance, and a hint of something more intimate, yet shrouded in mystery. With her hands now clean of blood and the cool antiseptic lingering on her skin, Sarapen finally broke the silence. Her eyes, still alert and probing, fixed on the man who had silently borne his inexplicable fate. "Before we proceed with any further nonsense," she said, a wry edge coloring her tone, "I need to know who exactly I'm treating." Here, there was a playful defiance in her words, a challenge directed not just at the man before her, but at the enigmatic shield he maintained around his past. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the hidden self that he so carefully concealed. Then, with the calm assurance of someone who had long mastered his own secrets, he replied, "Reys." The single word, uttered almost casually, reverberated in the quiet room as if it were an incantation. For a long moment, Sarapen merely regarded him, the gravity of his simple declaration sinking in alongside the undeniable allure of the mystery it carried. "Reys," she repeated slowly, as though testing the sound of his name against her own expectations. "That's it?" Her tone was gentle, edged with a mix of disbelief and a wry, inviting curiosity. "I mean, it suits you, simple, strong, and with a quiet weight. But who are you, really?" The question was not asked as a demand for a biography. Rather, it was a probing invitation to peel back the layers of artful aloofness that had so long kept him at arm's length. Reys's eyes met hers, the subtle golden hue within them flickering in a way that hinted at deeper stories yet unspoken. "I'm just someone who's been trying to survive," he murmured, the words carrying equal parts resignation and a hint of defiant pride. His voice was soft, almost tentative, leaving the meaning suspended in the cool, antiseptic air. Yet, even as he spoke, the guarded manner in which he delivered his answer betrayed a lifetime of whispered secrets, a reality he was loath to share completely. A brief, charged silence followed as Sarapen studied him. The stern set of her jaw softened slightly, replaced by a spark of amused incredulity. "Survival doesn't quite explain the way you mend," she countered, a playful smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You heal like a miracle, Reys, is it? And miracles, as far as I can tell, come with a side of extraordinary baggage." The corners of his mouth twitched with a subtle hint of a smile, a rare concession to her teasing nature. "Maybe," he allowed, his tone light yet layered with unspoken meaning. "Or perhaps it's just the way I am." His reply was brief, but it carried an under. Her gaze never wavered from his, sharp and inquisitive as she pressed on. "And what might that way be?" Sarapen pressed, her voice balancing between sincere inquiry and sardonic amusement. "I expect a tale of star-crossed luck, or perhaps a curse that only applies to the damnably resilient." The playful banter danced in the air, yet behind it lay the gravity of all that was unresolved, a history soaked in blood and secrets that neither dared to fully articulate. Reys shifted in his seat, the motion subtle, as though weighted by the gravitas of the questions trailing behind her witty remarks. "I could say it's a curse," he replied slowly, almost as if savoring the truth with restraint. "But a curse or a blessing, I've long ceased to care about the labels." His words were simple, but resonated with quiet defiance, hinting at battles fought both in the open and in the shadows of his past. The air between them vibrated with an intimacy that was both newfound and fraught with peril. Sarapen's eyes softened for a moment, betraying a mix of empathy and resolve. "You know," she said softly, "your silence, your mystery, it's intriguing. But it's also dangerous. A man who hides so much may very well be hiding something that could ruin him, if you let it." Her words were not merely cautionary. They were a subtle invitation for him to trust her with those unspoken scars, to allow her to see beyond the facade of cool compliance. Reys's gaze lingered on her for a long moment. A silent debate raged in the depths of those golden eyes, as if measuring the worthiness of her concern against the weight of his own secrets. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry both defeat and relief, he said, "I suppose I'm much the same as I've always been. No one really gets to know me, until perhaps now." The admission was fleeting, but it opened a narrow window into the labyrinth of his existence. The intimacy of that moment was underscored by the steady tick of the clock and the soft, persistent hum of the heater, a soundtrack to an unfolding truth that promised to disrupt the carefully held balance between anonymity and revelation. With every exchanged word, every subtle gesture, the boundaries between them began to blur, hinting at a connection forged not solely by necessity, but by a profound, if reluctant, mutual understanding. In that small, sunlit room, the simple act of naming a single word became the catalyst for unraveling mysteries that both terrified and intrigued her. And as the day wore on, their conversation continued to weave a delicate tapestry of wit, defiance, and vulnerability. A tapestry that would, in time, reveal not just the true identity of the man called Reys, past shadows, hints of a troubled history. The quiet intimacy of the clinic was now laced with the weight of unsaid stories, and Sarapen's curiosity grew insistent. With the tension still palpable between them, she leaned in, her eyes narrowing, as she searched his face for any glimpse of vulnerability. "Reys," she began, her voice steady yet edged with determination. "You've been vague about what happened to you. Tell me the truth. What really did occur that left you like this?" For a moment, the air thickened with silence. The only sound was the patient ticking of the clock, each tick punctuating the unspoken demand for honesty. Reys's gaze shifted downward, a subtle frown marring his otherwise impassive expression. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, and carried a trace of reluctance mixed with sorrow. "I was ambushed," he said simply, the single word hanging heavily between them. Sarapen pressed on, not satisfied with such a sparse reply. "Ambushed? By whom or for what reason? That kind of attack isn't random." Her words were direct, laced with clinical precision, honed by years of diagnosing the physical and emotional wounds of others. She regarded him intently, every gesture a silent challenge for further explanation. He sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to pull at the seams of his carefully controlled facade. "Men," he admitted softly, his eyes betraying a momentary flash of pain. "I was in the way. They took exception to what I represented." His pause was heavy, laden with an implication that went far beyond a simple physical confrontation. It was as if his very existence was an anomaly, a threat in a world steeped in fear and prejudice. Sarapen's mind churned with questions, each one probing at the fragile margins of his guarded past. "What did you represent, Reys?" she asked, her tone both curious and cautious, as if the mere question might unleash a torrent of memories better left unspoken. But the truth, she knew, was the key to understanding the miracle of his healing and the danger that lurked in every corner of his existence. His eyes, a storm of conflicting emotions, met hers briefly before darting away. I was just passing through," he murmured, each word a struggle against the tide of an overwhelming past. But even as he spoke these words, Sarapen could sense the chasms of conflict behind them, a hint of battles fought in silence and wounds that marred more than his skin. The phrase, "passing through," felt insufficient, a feeble attempt to cloak a history that was anything but transient. "You expect me to believe you were merely on your way here?" Sarapen said sharply, her voice rising slightly with a mix of incredulity and a genuine need to know. "The way your wound healed, that look in your eyes, it doesn't add up to a simple accident." Her words, though imbued with professional skepticism, carried the weight of a person. Reys's jaw tightened, and for a moment it appeared that he was on the verge of resisting her probing gaze. The flicker of golden light in his eyes dimmed as he bowed his head slightly, caught in the gravity of the memories he wished to hide. "There's much you wouldn't understand," he finally said, his tone evasive, yet hinting at a depth of pain and experience that stretched far beyond what she could imagine. The air between them shivered with the resonance of lost time and unhealed scars. Sarapen's eyes softened, not in pity, but in fierce determination to see past the half-truths and guarded responses. "Try me," she challenged quietly. If your past is so heavy, then let me help ease the burden. There was an urgency in her voice, a plea wrapped in the guise of professional necessity, yet undoubtedly personal. She craved a glimpse into the darkness that had undoubtedly shaped him, even if the full tale remained obscured by his reticence. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. In that suspended moment, the only thing that mattered was the unspoken connection between them, the shared understanding that some wounds, physical or otherwise, demanded acknowledgement before they could ever begin to heal. Finally, with a hesitant exhale, Reys spoke again, his voice softer, almost resigned. I was ambushed by a group. Men. They came out of nowhere, determined to erase something that I had become. His words were sparse, marked by a pain that transcended language, leaving more questions than answers. Sarapen absorbed his confession like a shard of broken glass, a painful reminder of the fragility of truth and the scars it leaves behind. His rapid healing, his mysterious resilience, was no miracle without its price. It was a silent contract with forces dark and formidable, forces that would not rest until they reclaimed what they believed was theirs. Reys, she murmured, her voice trembling with a mix of compassion and steely resolve. There's a story behind this, isn't there? Something that even you can't fully forget. She reached out, not to comfort, but to connect, to bridge the gap between his guarded history and the hope that still flickered in her eyes. His gaze, now laden with a profound melancholy, held hers for a moment, silently begging for understanding, yet warning against complete exposure. Perhaps, he replied, each word a careful admission of a tortured past. Some truths are best left in the shadows. And in that moment, as the clock ticked and the cold winter night pressed in around them, the dangerous allure of his past became the precipice upon which their uneasy alliance teetered, a precarious balance of secrets and survival. Love Amidst Crisis. A spark in the dark. In the dim light of the early morning, as the storm outside continued to rage and the relentless tick of the clock echoed in the silent corridors of the clinic, an unexpected warmth began to seep into the cold clinical space. Between the clinical urgency and the secrets of a shadowed past, something tender started to unfurl, a subtle spark of connection that neither of them could ignore. Sarapen moved with a measured determination, the crisp swish of her lab coat punctuating the otherwise subdued environment. But beneath her carefully maintained professionalism, her eyes betrayed a softening, a vulnerability that had long been hidden beneath layers of duty. Each time she glanced at Reys, now seated quietly by the window with his golden eyes half hidden behind unyielding stoicism, she caught a glimpse of something raw and unexpectedly tender. It was as if, amid the chaos of pain and mystery, his guarded exterior was slowly giving way to something more human, something luminous. Reys, for his part, could not entirely mask the flicker of emotion that danced across his features whenever her gaze met his. In the space between their measured words, there grew moments filled with silence that spoke louder than any clinical detail. While Sarapen adjusted a stack of files or refilled a cup of coffee, her mind would frequently wander, back to the spark in his eyes, the way they softened for a heartbeat when confronted with her sincere concern. The transformation, though subtle, created an almost tangible shift in the room, as if a gentle warmth had pierced the frost of isolation. You know, Sarapen remarked one morning, her tone casually laced with both humor and a touch of vulnerability. For someone who's been through hell, you sure have a way of looking at life. It's almost as if you see something that the rest of us miss. Her words hung in the air with a curious blend of challenge and invitation. Reys' expression remained composed at first, his lips curving into a slight, almost imperceptible smile, a gesture that hinted at the internal conflict within him, torn between habit and the unexpected vulnerability that her sincere tone seemed to inspire. Maybe, he replied softly. the ambiguity of his words capturing the complexity of his inner world. "It's not so much what I see, as what I choose to remember." There was a wistfulness in his tone, a delicate confession that hinted at memories of better days, or perhaps the remnants of an emotion he had long tried to bury. Even as his words were curt, they resonated with an undercurrent of longing. The contrast between his cool detachment and the tender trace of longing in his eyes was magnetic, drawing her closer despite the storm of danger swirling around them. In a brief, unscripted moment, their hands brushed as Sarapen reached for a pen on the counter. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a charge of undeniable electricity through both of them. It was a moment steeped in quiet acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that beneath the layers of clinical detachment and hardened exterior, there lay a single, unspoken truth. They were more alike than either cared to admit. The surge of warmth in that brief contact kindled something within Sarapen, an awareness that her pragmatic determination was momentarily softened by a vulnerable hope, a desire. Their exchanges began to lace routine clinical procedures with moments of unexpected levity. As Sarapen methodically recorded patient details on a clipboard, she couldn't help but occasionally divert her gaze to Reys, now watching the snowfall outside. His eyes, usually so guarded, reflected a mixture of resilience and a fragile openness that felt like an unspoken invitation. "You ever wonder what it's like?" she asked one quiet moment. "To let someone in. Really let them in when you've seen everything your life has to offer?" There was a gentle earnestness in her voice, a soft protest against the isolation that had so long defined her world. Reys turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that betrayed his typical reticence. "Sometimes," he murmured, "I wonder if letting someone in might make the burden a little lighter." His response, though brief, held the promise of uncharted territories, a possibility that trust and intimacy might provide salvation from the relentless cycle of danger and solitude. In the midst of clinical tasks and the hum of the heater, their sober words began to reveal the contours of a budding connection. Sarapen's sarcasm, which once served as a shield against vulnerability, now transformed into playful banter that served to bridge the distance between them. "If your healing is as miraculous as you claim, then maybe I should consider myself lucky," she teased one afternoon as she adjusted the bandages with a flourish. Reys' reply, a low chuckle that warmed the otherwise cool air, resonated deeply in that small space, an affirmation that despite everything, there was room for humor, and perhaps a spark of something more profound. Yet, amidst the playful exchange and the fragile intimacy, there was still an undeniable undercurrent of crisis, a world outside that beckoned with its relentless challenges. The storm that raged beyond the clinic's thin walls, the memories of ambush and unspoken pain, hovered like specters in the background. But within that moment, in the quiet interlude between healing and hardship, the two formed a tentative alliance of hearts, a promise that even in the midst of crisis, love might ignite as the brightest, most defiant light of all. And so, as the day wore on, and the delicate interplay of glances, touches, and words wove a tapestry of emerging romance, Sarapen found herself caught in a paradox. Here, in a sanctuary, filled with danger and secrets, a spark had been lit. One that promised both the potential for profound connection and the risk of exposing wounds too deep to heal. The boundaries they had so strictly enforced now blurred subtly as the clinical became personal and the violence of the outside world was the outside world, intruding voices and warnings. Outside the clinic, nature roared with untamed fury. The bitter wind whipped through the darkened streets of the small town, while a relentless storm battered the landscape. Inside, the delicate balance of sanctuary and peril was about to be disrupted. As the steady hum of the heater mingled with the ticking clock, a sudden knock at the door punctured the fragile calm. a stark reminder that the world beyond these walls was never far away. Seraphi's heart skipped a beat. Every sound outside seemed magnified by the relentless pounding of the rain and the howls of the wind. With cautious steps, she approached the door and slowly peered through a frosted window. There, standing against the gloomy backdrop, was a local figure, a man bundled in heavy clothes, his face partially hidden under a worn cap, yet his eyes burned with unmistakable concern. "Jack," Seraphi greeted him, her voice a mix of relief and guarded caution. Jack, known in the area for his forthright nature and deep ties to the community, stepped inside, shaking off the biting cold. His cheeks were ruddy from the chill, and a thin layer of frost clung to his coat. Though his greeting was warm, there was an undercurrent of urgency in his voice. "Heard there was trouble at your door last night," he said gruffly, glancing around the clinic's modest interior, as if to ensure that no unwanted eyes were watching. Seraphi managed a tight smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "Just another storm and another wounded soul, Jack. You know how it is." But there was more in her tone, a subtle warning that the situation might be growing perilous. Jack's gaze shifted to Reys, who remained seated near the window, his expression as inscrutable as ever. "And what about him? He's not just another patient, is he?" Jack's question came out low and serious, the words heavy with the unspoken knowledge of the dangers that lurked beyond the clinic. Seraphi's eyes flickered over to Reys briefly, then back to Jack. "Let's just say he has a past that follows him like a shadow," she replied, her voice tense with equal parts protectiveness and apprehension. Jack frowned, the lines on his face deepening as he took in her words. "In this town, nothing stays buried for long. You'd do well to keep your eyes open." The warning was clear, and as Jack's words lingered in the room, the clinic suddenly felt a little less secure. The conversation shifted swiftly into a rapid exchange, laden with practical concerns and an undercurrent of implicit dread. "I appreciate your concern, Jack, but I have things under control," Seraphi insisted, trying to project confidence as she glanced at the battered windows that barely blocked the furious elements beyond. Her tone was firm, yet even she couldn't mask the tension creeping into her voice. Jack's eyes darted toward the door, then back to her, his own worry evident now. "The storm out there isn't the only thing to fear," he warned, lowering his voice. "There's talk of unusual activity, strangers moving around, tracking for something or someone. The roads are dangerous, and the usual quiet of these parts. It's changing." His words sent a shiver down her. Across the room, Reys remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the darkened street outside, as if he too sensed the encroaching threat. Seraphi's mind raced. The hospital had become a temporary safe haven, yet the intrusion of a trusted local, like Jack, underscored the reality that their refuge was fragile. Every creak, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, reminded her that they were not isolated from the chaos of the world. Jack continued, his tone gravely earnest. "You have to understand, Seraphi, these aren't just random wanderers. Folks around here have been whispering about hunters, men with a purpose, tracking something they can't control." The word hunters hung ominously in the air, a term that had once seemed confined to urban legends and whispered folklore. Now it was a reality that pressed down on them with palpable weight. Seraphi's pragmatic mind fought to reconcile Jack's dire words with the evidence of the night before. A night of hidden wounds, strange healing, and unspeakable secrets. "I'm aware," she replied cautiously. "This storm, these threats, they're part of a larger pattern, one that I've seen more than once. I intend to keep things as secure as I can, but..." Her gaze hardened as she looked directly at Reys. "We need to be realistic. This place is a refuge, not a fortress." Jack's expression softened with a mixture of pity and stern resolve. "I just worry, Seraphi. With someone like him here, and with the world outside changing so fast, you..." Must be putting your own neck at risk." His voice dropped to a whisper, as though he feared the very sound might draw unwanted attention. Sarapen nodded slightly, the reality of the situation settling heavily upon her. She knew the importance of Jack's warning, a reminder that even the sanctity of her clinic could not fully shield them from the dangers of the outside world. As the conversation faded into a heavy silence, the storm outside raged on. Rain lashed the glass, and the wind howled with ferocity, a constant, relentless reminder of the unpredictable world beyond. Sarapen felt a surge of determination. She understood that amidst the cold chaos and impending threats, their momentary haven was under constant siege. Yet, in that charged atmosphere, every word exchanged, every cautious glance, strengthened her resolve. "They're out there," she murmured almost to herself, a statement as much as a vow. "And we have to be ready for whatever comes next." Jack's presence, though brief, had punctuated the precarious silence with urgency and dread. The external warnings had forced her to confront the fact that her carefully constructed sanctuary was under threat, and that the mysteries contained within, particularly Reys's, might be at the heart of dangers far greater than either of them had imagined. In that moment, with the bitter cold seeping through every crack and the storm's fury echoing like a warning, Sarapen steeled herself for the inevitable challenges. The external world was intruding, its voices filled with warnings that could no longer be ignored. And as the doctor turned back to the work at hand, her eyes now burned with a renewed determination, one forged in the crucible of crisis where every whispered warning was a promise that survival demanded vigilance, sacrifice. Hunters at the door. The new threat emerges. As dusk faded into an inky twilight, the uneasy calm within the clinic was shattered once again, this time by a visitor whose presence carried the weight of impending doom. The door creaked, opened slowly, its sound echoing in a way that set every nerve on edge. Sarapen glanced up from her meticulous work, her eyes narrowing as she recognized a stranger who stepped into the low light with deliberate silence, draped in a dark, weathered coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. The man's demeanor was as chilling as the storm raging outside. His gaze swept the room with cold precision before settling on Reys, whose troubled eyes hinted at secrets too deep to share. The stranger's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile, one that sent an involuntary shudder through Sarapen. There was something predatory in his calm, almost calculating manner, as if he carried the promise of unseen peril. "Evening," the visitor greeted in a low, measured tone that resonated with an unsettling authority. His voice was quiet yet carried an undeniable weight, a voice meant to instill both respect and fear. Sarapen's practiced calm wavered for just a moment as she replied, "Can I help you?" Her tone, though controlled, betrayed a hint of apprehension. The stranger's eyes, dark and piercing, moved slowly from Sarapen to Reys, and then back again. "I'm looking for someone," he said simply, his words laced with an undercurrent that hinted at dark, relentless pursuits. "A friend of mine, someone who, like you, dwells on the fringes of what's considered normal." His words fell heavily in the stillness of the room, and Sarapen felt a chill that reached deep into her bones. Reys shifted in his chair, his features darkening as though he recognized the threat implicit in the stranger's words. "Yet," the visitor continued, his tone softening just enough to sound almost conversational, "I know about the hunters. I know they're tracking every trace of the extraordinary, those who refuse to fade into the shadows." Each syllable was deliberate, as if he intended to peel away the small veneer of safety that the clinic had provided. Seraphie's heart pounded in her chest, while her mind raced to connect the dots. The term hunters was no idle rumor. It carried with it the weight of ancient grudges and modern vendettas. She fought to maintain her composure, her voice steady but edged with defiance. "What do you want with him?" she asked, directing the question towards Reys. though her eyes flicked briefly to the mysterious visitor. "And why should I trust that you're not here to stir trouble?" The stranger's smile widened imperceptibly. "Trouble, Doctor? I bring only the truth, a truth that has been buried too long in this forsaken land." His words were a venomous whisper, one that hinted at relentless pursuits and the dark forces behind them. Reys, or whoever he claims to be, is not merely a wanderer or a miracle of nature. He carries with him a legacy that threatens those who would keep the natural order intact. And if you truly care for him, you'll understand that their pursuit is not just a matter of survival. The intensity of his words made the room seem to contract, the cold concrete and flickering lamplight now merging with an all-encompassing sense of dread. Sarapen's thoughts swirled with a mixture of professional caution and a personal, fierce determination to protect the man she had come to regard with a guarded empathy. "You come in here with half-truths and dire warnings," she said, her voice resolute. "But what exactly are you offering? An opportunity to run, or a chance to finally face the danger head-on?" A spark of amusement danced in the stranger's eyes as he leaned forward, the shadows deepening the contours of his face into something both striking and ominous. "I'm not here to offer you a way out," he replied, "but to make it clear that the hunters are closing in. They will stop at nothing to reclaim what they believe belongs to them, whether it's a curse, a gift, or the very essence of our nature." His words, enigmatic and foreboding, resonated like a dirge in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the room. Reys's expression shifted imperceptibly, a subtle mixture of resignation and defiance as the weight of the stranger's revelation pressed upon him. The air in the clinic turned heavy with the implication that safety was an illusion, and that every shadow outside might conceal a hunter on the prowl. Sarapen's pulse quickened, each beat a reminder that the fragile shelter they had built was under siege by forces far more ancient and ruthless than she had ever imagined. "Listen," the visitor continued, his voice now softer, but no less intense. "I don't bring these warnings to frighten you. I bring them because truth is a blade, and it is already cutting through your sanctuary." His gaze held hers firmly, challenging her to see beyond the surface of clinical routine and to recognize the encroaching darkness. "Decide now. Either you fortify this place and stand your ground, or you're going to be swept away by a storm of persecution that stops for no one." Sarapen swallowed hard. The stakes had never been higher, and the balance of power between those seeking to control the extraordinary and those who, like her, had been thrust into its orbit was precarious, at best. In that charged moment, as the visitor's warnings hung in the air like a gaunt specter, she knew that every decision from this point forward would tip the scales between survival and annihilation. The world outside, with its relentless fury and dark intentions, had intruded. Danger intensifies. The clinic becomes a fortress. The storm outside raged with an almost sentient fury, battering the clinic's thin walls with icy gusts and a relentless, mournful howl. Inside, the small space that had served as their temporary sanctuary began to feel like a sealed fortress, its suffocating air thick with tension and fear. Every creak of the old floorboards and every minute tick of the clock magnified the sensation of being trapped in a cage, where safety was nothing more than a fragile illusion. Sarapen moved through the clinic with a palpable urgency, her eyes never straying far from the windows where sheets of rain blurred the horizon. The relentless pounding of the storm and the intermittent groans of the wind outside echoed inside, as if reminding her that danger lurked in every shadow beyond these walls. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, each beat a steady reminder that their fragile refuge might soon become a battleground. Reys, seated near the frosted window, appeared lost in a restless vigil. His golden eyes, usually guarded and enigmatic, now darted from one side of the room to the other, scanning every corner as if expecting a threat to materialize at any moment. His every movement, from the subtle flex of his hand to the tightening, around his jaw, spoke of a heightened alertness that could not be masked. The sterile light of the clinic only deepened the contrast between the cold efficiency of the space and the raw emotional stress that both of them now shared. Together, they began fortifying the clinic, not with heavy artillery, but with a hurried, methodical sense of purpose born from survival instincts honed over years in isolation. Sarapen secured the flimsy windows with extra boards, her hands trembling slightly as she worked under the weight of uncertainty. Every nail driven into the wood, every board fixed in place, was a silent promise to hold the storm, and the hunters, at bay. Yet with each action, the reality of their precarious situation sank deeper into her heart. She could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting, until every corner of the clinic seemed to pulse with a life of its own. In the cramped supply closet, Sarapen and Reys scoured through stacks of medical supplies, gathering all the essentials for a potential evacuation. Each movement was precise, almost ritualistic, as though they were both trying to stave off the overwhelming dread of what might come next. The heavy silence in the room was punctuated by the clatter of boxes being rearranged and the occasional whispered instruction between them. "We need to pack light, but make it enough to last," Sarapen muttered, her voice hoarse with the emotion of a woman who had seen too many nights end in tragedy. At the same time, the constant cacophony of the storm outside served as a relentless reminder of the uncertainty swirling in the world beyond. The wind's howls were no longer mere background noise. They were a foreboding chorus that echoed the threat of an impending attack. Every gust that rattled the clinic's exterior felt like an unwelcome harbinger. Reys moved with a quiet efficiency as he helped Sarapen organize the evacuation supplies. His calm demeanor belied the tension boiling within him. A stoic acceptance mingled with a hint of apprehension. The clinic's interior, once a sanctuary of order, now resembled a fortress under siege. The hurried footsteps, the whispered plans, and the furtive glances exchanged between them all spoke of a desperate scramble to prepare for an unknown future. Each plan they devised was shadowed by the stark reality that nothing was certain. The storm could push them to the brink at any moment, and the hunters were a threat that loomed ever closer. Emotional stress gnawed at Sarapen as she worked, a constant companion that she could neither shake nor ignore. Every time she paused to secure another window or double-check the supply list, the question of what the future held would flash across her mind like a dark omen. Would their efforts be enough to stave off the looming danger? Could this fortified clinic, with its patched-together defenses, stand against the relentless pursuit of forces that wanted to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs? As the hours stretched on, the relentless barrage of the storm outside mingled with a growing inner dread. The once familiar comforts of the clinic now felt confining and isolating, a stark reminder that even inside these walls, they were not safe from the violence of the world. In the dim glow of emergency lights, every shadow cast on the floor seemed to whisper caution. Every creak of the structure, a signal that their sanctuary was as fragile as the hope they clung to. The mounting anxiety reached a fevered pitch as Sarapen finally stepped back to survey their handiwork. The reinforced windows, the neatly packed bags, the hastily scribbled emergency plan on a scrap of paper. All of these were temporary defenses in a world where danger was both relentless and inevitable. With a heavy sigh, she met Reys' gaze, finding in his eyes a mirror of her own doubts and fears. "We're barely holding it together," she whispered, her voice a blend of resignation and grim determination. "But we have no choice. We have to believe that this small fortress will give us just enough time to fight back." In that charged moment, as the storm raged on and the clinic's corridors grew darker with each passing minute, their shared resolve became the only beacon of hope in the suffocating gloom. The future was uncertain, and every sound, every trembling heartbeat, underscored the fragility of their existence. Yet, amid the overwhelming tension and the weight of impending doom, They vowed silently to weather the plan, crafting a diversion. In the oppressive silence that followed the ominous warnings, Sarapen and Reys locked eyes with a shared understanding. They needed more than just fortified walls to hold back the hunters. The relentless storm outside seemed to echo their inner urgency, drumming a steady cadence that forced them to confront the harsh reality. With measured resolve, Sarapen broke the silence, her voice firm yet laced with the weight of their predicament. "We can't keep waiting here for them to make their move," she declared, glancing at Reys. "We need to create a diversion, a decoy to mislead them." Reys nodded slowly, the faint glimmer in his golden eyes reflecting a mix of determination and trepidation. "I know of an abandoned cabin on the outskirts, a relic of a time when this town had secrets to hide," he offered, his tone low and deliberate, as if every word were carefully chosen. The idea sparked something within her, a tangible thread of hope woven into the fabric of their desperate plan. Their conversation quickly turned tactical as they began to lay out the details, each word carefully measured against the weight of the looming threat. "That cabin," Sarapen said, "has been empty for years. The locals say it's haunted by memories of a forgotten past, that its walls hold whispers of lives long gone." As she spoke, her mind's eye painted a vivid portrait of the structure, a crumbling, eerie refuge in a forgotten corner of the forest, shrouded by gnarled trees and draped in a perpetual veil of mist. Reys leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Its isolation works to our advantage. If we can make it look as if someone has taken up residence there, the hunters will be forced to believe we've moved the target." His eyes flickered with the burden of his hidden history, but in that moment, his focus was entirely on the tactical necessity. The idea of creating a decoy was as perilous as it was ingenious, a gamble that required both daring ingenuity and the willingness to manipulate the shadows. Inside the clinic, every creak of the floor and every gust of wind against the glass became a solemn reminder of the stakes at hand. Sarapen's internal monologue churned as she meticulously calculated the risks. "We have to outsmart them," she thought. "If these hunters can sense every nuance, every shift in our energy, then we must craft a diversion so convincing that it draws them away entirely." Her mind darted to the details: old, tattered curtains, a worn-out bed left in disarray, signs of recent habitation that could be faked with minimal effort, all elements that could transform a decrepit cabin into a believable sanctuary. "We'll need to gather supplies, old blankets, canned food, maybe even a few dim lights to mimic activity," Sarapen continued, her tone a blend of clinical precision and creative urgency. "I can rig up something with the window coverings and a battery-powered lantern. It won't be perfect, but it might just be enough to fool them, to give us time." Reys regarded her, his expression unreadable, but his nod affirming the plan. "I've trekked the edges of this forest before," he said quietly, recalling the long-forgotten paths winding toward the cabin. "It's eerie. The cabin stands alone, almost swallowed by the undergrowth. Its silhouette against the night sky appears like a ghost, a remnant of a life that's now only whispering through broken boards and creaking rafters." The vivid imagery in his words lent a layer of haunting beauty to their strategy, imbuing the plan with a sense of both peril and possibility. Their dialogue continued, overlapping with the low murmur of their thoughts. Sarapen's internal voice battled with practicalities. Time is short. Every minute we delay could mean a closer intrusion from those relentless hunters. Yet, her determination remained unshaken. "We'll leave immediately after tonight's shift. I want the decoy to be set up before dawn," she instructed, her voice resolute but calm, a beacon of command amid the chaos of fear. Reys replied with a hint of wry humor. "I never thought I'd be plotting a strategy at the hands of a brilliant, stubborn doctor." His remark, though light-hearted, carried a note of solemnity, a tacit acknowledgement that survival now depended on their ability to manipulate perceptions as much as it did on brute force. Outside, the storm raged on, each crash of thunder and splatter of rain punctuating their plans. Inside, with the blueprint of the diversion now etched firmly in their minds, the clinic transformed from a mere shelter into a war room, a temporary fortress where every whisper, every carefully guarded word, was a step toward reclaiming their uncertain future. As they prepared to depart, Sarapen took a final, measured look around the room, the familiar yet cold surroundings now charged with an electrifying urgency. "This cabin might just be our lifeline," she murmured to herself, a quiet promise that if they could misdirect the hunters, they'd find a way to outlast the coming storm. And with that thought, their plan took root, a fragile but potent defiance against the encroaching darkness, a calculated the setup, preparing the decoy. Under the cloak of darkness and the relentless percussion of rain, Sarapen and Reys slipped into the cold wilderness, their steps measured and determined as they made their way toward the forgotten cabin. The path was treacherous, winding through dense clusters of gnarled trees and slippery underbrush, yet each step was guided by the quiet precision of a well-practiced plan. Every footfall on the wet forest floor echoed like a muted heartbeat, a rhythm that both spurred them on and underscored the gravity of their task. At last, they reached the cabin, a decrepit, half-swallowed relic, standing isolated under a shroud of mist. Its weathered boards and sagging roof spoke of a long-forgotten era, a remnant of lives once lived and now lost to time. The structure's eerie silhouette, illuminated briefly by a stray beam of moonlight, sent a shiver down Sarapen's spine. Yet, in its loneliness, the cabin held a latent potential to become the decoy they so desperately needed. Without wasting a moment, Sarapen set to work, her practical mind already buzzing with tactical detail. "We need to create the illusion of recent habitation," she stated decisively, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. "Old blankets here, some canned food left out, perhaps a lantern glowing softly by the window. It must feel lived in, even if just for a few fleeting hours." Reys nodded, his eyes tracing the rugged outline of the cabin, as if memorizing every angle and potential hiding spot. He, too, was a connoisseur of the terrain, recalling the countless nights spent navigating these very woods. Together, they began gathering supplies from their modest stash. Sarapen rummaged through a waterproof bag stuffed with essentials, faded blankets, a couple of canned goods, and a small battery-powered lantern. With practiced efficiency, she draped the blankets around the cabin's entrance, fashioning them to look as though someone had just stepped away in haste. Reys, meanwhile, unrolled a faded rug and set it near a corner by the window, creating the impression that someone had recently sought comfort and rest there. Their movements were fluid and synchronized. Each action was executed with the cinematic grace of a well-rehearsed scene. Amid the quiet intensity, a brief, playful banter emerged. "You always were the meticulous one," Reys teased as he measured the distance from the cabin to the main road with a worn map. His tone was light, the momentary humor a brief reprieve from the pervasive tension. Sarapen smiled, a soft flicker of warmth in her eyes. "And you, Reys, are our in-house navigator. Without you, we'd be lost in these damn woods," she replied, her voice laced with a mix of affection and mock reproach. As they settled into their tasks, every detail of the setup took on an almost ritualistic quality. Sarapen carefully positioned the lantern so that its soft amber glow spilled out through the dusty window, casting shadows that hinted at quiet activity within. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside, the slow Reys took charge of mapping the route for their planned diversion. He spread out a faded map on the cabin's rickety table and traced a line with his finger, a path that led away from this stronghold, offering a potential escape if the hunters were ever to discover the ruse. "If they follow our trail," he murmured, "it'll take them deep into the woods before they realize there's nothing here." His voice was steady, pragmatic, and yet beneath the surface lay a trace of hope. A hope that this plan might grant them the precious time they needed. Meanwhile, Sarapen adjusted the arrangement of makeshift furnishings inside the cabin. She set a worn-up, creaky chair near the door, as if to suggest that someone had just been sitting, catching their breath after a long, arduous journey. In one corner, a small table held an assortment of scattered papers and a half-empty mug. An echo of a life abruptly interrupted. Every detail, no matter how minute, was curated to build a facade of normalcy in an otherwise derelict space. The hours slipped by with the steady cadence of rain against the cabin's warped wood. Though the night was heavy with uncertainty and the imminence of danger, these quiet preparations infused the air with a tangible purpose. Occasionally, amid their focused silence, their eyes would meet, and in those fleeting glances, there was an unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the risk they were taking, and the hope that united them in this desperate bid for survival. As the last piece of their setup fell into place, Sarapen stood back and surveyed their handiwork. The cabin now appeared convincingly occupied. A soft glow from the lantern flickered invitingly. Blankets were draped with the casual randomness of hurried use, and small personal touches whispered tales of recent human presence. Outside, the storm still raged, but for a few precious hours, the decoy stood as a testament to their resolve, a fragile stratagem designed to divert the relentless hunters. A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by the sound of distant thunder, and in that pause, both Sarapen and Reys knew that they had reached a critical juncture. Their plan, meticulous and risky, was now in place. Every step, every careful arrangement had been a gamble, a temporary reprieve from the brutal reality that lay beyond the fortress of the cabin, and as they prepared to retreat back into the cloak of night, their hearts beat in unison with a mixture of tension, determination, and a spark of defiant hope that, despite the darkness, they had created into the woods. The escape begins. Under the cloak of a waning moon and a sky smeared with drifting clouds, Sarapen and Reys slipped away from the fragile sanctuary of the clinic. The snow-covered ground, slick with recent rain and shimmering in the pale lunar glow, beckoned them into an uncertain darkness. Each step they took was accompanied by the crisp, rhythmic crunch of snow beneath their boots, a steady cadence that both propelled them forward and served as a constant reminder of the precarious world around them. The air was brittle and cold, each gust of wind cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. As they moved further away from the safety of the clinic, the world seemed to narrow into a vast, frozen wilderness. Trees stood as gaunt silhouettes against the night sky, their branches bare and etching eerie patterns against the luminescent backdrop. Every so often the wind would stir, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves and snowflakes, a soft, relentless whisper of the unpredictable dangers concealed in the dark. Seraphi's eyes darted to the moon above, its light pale but unyielding, casting long, distorted shadows that danced along the ground. The interplay of light and dark deepened the sensation of isolation, as if the woods themselves were alive and watching their every move. Despite the biting cold, a bead of sweat glistened on her brow, a silent testament to the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. It was a mix of fear and fierce determination. In these moments, she felt every heartbeat as a drum urging her to keep moving, even as the unknown pressed in from all sides. Reys, typically reserved and inscrutable, now seemed even more intense in the unforgiving landscape. His eyes, flickering with a guarded resolve, scanned the surroundings with meticulous care. He moved with a quiet precision that spoke of a deep familiarity with these woods, a connection forged by past experiences that he rarely revealed. Every subtle glance he cast over his shoulder, hinted at an ever-present awareness of the hidden threats that lurked beyond the reach of light. His calm exterior, underlined by a constant, almost tangible alertness, served as an unspoken promise to protect them both. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the clinic's comforting artificial warmth faded into the natural chill of the night. The sound of their steps on compacted snow was accompanied by a symphony of nature's own indicators of impending danger: the distant howl of a lone wolf, the rustle of nocturnal creatures stirring in the underbrush, and the ever-present whisper of wind carrying secrets of the forest. Every noise heightened their senses, each sound morphing into a possible signal that they were no longer alone. Even the silence was pregnant with an eerie anticipation, as though the woods were about to reveal hidden truths. In the moments between their careful strides, Sarapen's inner thoughts surged with both worry and determination. This is no longer merely about shelter. It's about survival in its rawest form, she reminded herself, heart pounding in her chest. Every frozen branch, every shadow could harbor unknown threats. Yet amid that nerve-wracking uncertainty, a steely resolve began to crystallize within her. She recalled the painstaking arrangements made at the Decoy cabin, the temporary respite, designed to mislead the relentless hunters, and recognized that although this escape was Reys broke the silence with a low murmur, his voice blending with the hushed sounds of the forest. "Stay close," he cautioned, his tone layered with both urgency and a subtle note of reassurance. His directive wasn't merely a command. It was a lifeline in the heart of the darkness, an unspoken promise that their fates were intertwined as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The moonlight cast a silvery glow across their path, illuminating patches of the forest floor where frost and snow glittered like a scattered mosaic. As they pressed on, each step became a careful negotiation with the environment, a constant battle against the icy grip of the cold and the unseen predators that might be prowling these parts. The snow swallowed their footprints quickly, erasing any sign of their passage, yet every sound persisted in the air like a lingering question: who or what was watching? At one point, Sarapen stopped abruptly, her breath catching as the distant sound of cracking ice sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced around sharply, eyes wide with alertness. For a moment, the stillness was deafening, charged with the possibility of danger lurking just beyond the light. Reys immediately moved to her side, his presence a steady assurance in the growing uncertainty. "It's just the forest settling," he offered quietly, though the tension in his voice betrayed his own doubts. Their journey through the night was marked by both desperation and determination. With every cautious step, the winding trail beneath their feet became a silent witness to their struggle, a struggle against not only the harsh elements, but also the relentless pressure of unseen foes. The forest, bathed intermittently in the wash of moonlight and deep shadows, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. In that ephemeral interplay of light and darkness, every crunch of snow, every whispered breeze became a powerful reminder. They were far from safe, and the wilderness held countless secrets, some of which could be deadly. Yet, in the midst of that daunting, icy expanse, there was also a quiet beauty, a stark, almost cinematic clarity that revealed the raw power of nature. The snow glistened like powdered diamonds under the moon, and the trees stood as silent sentinels guarding the mysteries of the wild. This breathtaking landscape, as treacherous as it was beautiful, now formed the setting for their escape. A desperate journey into the heart of danger, where the promise of survival was a fragile flame flickering against an implacable darkness. As they neared the edge of the forest and the faint glow of distant lights began to merge with the night, Sarapen squeezed Reys' hand momentarily. In that simple gesture, there was an unspoken vow, an acknowledgement that, despite the chilling dangers and the incessant threats lurking in every shadow, they would face the unknown together. And in that shared, silent promise, the cold, moonlit path seemed a little less daunting, even as the echo of every crunch. The cabin's lure, a brief moment of illusion. After what felt like an eternity battling the relentless cold and shadowy threats of the woods, Sarapen and Reys finally reached the Decoy cabin. Nestled at the edge of a clearing and veiled by dense, whispering pines, the abandoned structure rose from the snow like a relic from another time. Its weathered timbers and sagging roof were softened by the gentle caress of moonlight, casting silvery beams that turned each crooked line into a striking testament of decay and bygone beauty. They paused at the threshold, taking in the eerie, almost cinematic allure of the cabin. For a split second, the harsh reality of their flight seemed to melt away, replaced by a bittersweet relief. The building, once a forgotten testament to solitude, now promised a brief sanctuary, a place where they could orchestrate their ruse, and perhaps regain a fleeting sense of control over a chaotic fate. Sarapen immediately set to work, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "We need to make it look like someone has been living here," she whispered, her voice both practical and hopeful. The plan was as fragile as the winter frost clinging to the cabin's outer walls, but within that fragility lay a spark of possibility. She pulled out a collection of old, threadbare blankets from their supplies and draped them haphazardly over the sagging front steps, careful to leave subtle hints of recent disturbance, folds that looked deliberately rumpled as if someone had just left in a hurry. Reys moved to the dilapidated window, where a layer of frost obscured the view outside. With measured deliberation, he positioned a small battery-powered lantern on a rickety table by the window. Soon, a soft amber glow began to seep out through the glass, lending the cabin an inviting, if deceptive, warmth. The light flickered, gently, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn floorboards and imbuing the space with an almost spectral grace. Every detail was meticulously arranged. A creaky chair set haphazardly near the door, a few scattered yellowed papers resting. On a battered side table, a tableau that whispered, "Someone was here." As they labored in unspoken harmony, the process became more than a tactical necessity. It evolved into a shared ritual that momentarily suspended the ever-looming danger outside. Sarapen's gaze drifted toward Reys as he carefully adjusted the blanket's edge, and in that silent exchange, both recognized the fleeting comfort that their efforts created. Despite the bitter wind and the threatening darkness beyond the cabin's fragile confines, there was a tender, almost imperceptible warmth in that moment, a secret smile shared between two souls who had found, amidst the chaos, a sliver of refuge. Yet even as the false safe haven began to take shape, an undercurrent of tension remained. Every creak of the old wood and every rustle of the cold, damp wind through the pines reminded them that this haven was only an illusion, a necessary diversion meant to buy time rather than offer true protection. Sarapen's internal thoughts surged with caution. This cabin is our lifeline, but it's as fragile as a dream. One wrong move, or one too many prying eyes, and it will all come crashing down. Meanwhile, Reys' steady presence was a quiet anchor amid the tension, his eyes betraying. As the final touches were applied, the cabin transformed before their eyes. What was once a forlorn, abandoned structure now pulsed with an artificial vibrancy, designed to mislead the hunters. The soft glow from the lantern, the scattered artifacts of a supposed life, and the intentional disarray of everyday objects painted a picture so convincing it almost made the danger outside seem distant. The cabin's haunting beauty had been co-opted into an instrument of deception, a decoy that was as much a work of art as it was a survival strategy. For a moment, as they stepped back to survey their handiwork, a wave of relief swept over Sarapen. The meticulous setup, born from desperation and ingenuity, offered them a brief respite from the relentless threat that had dogged their every step in the woods. "It looks lived in," she murmured, her tone a mixture of cautious optimism and wistful longing. The illusion was perfect enough to buy them time, but she knew that within the deceptive calm, the dangers of the outside world still loomed large. Reys's quiet voice broke through her reverie. "We have a window now, literally and figuratively. If the hunters follow the decoy, we can slip away while they're busy investigating." His words, laced with a hint of renewed determination, resonated in the cold night air. The plan was dangerous, relying on the hunters' expectations and the calculated mirage they had created, yet it was the only chance they had. In the deep silence that followed, the cabin itself seemed to exhale, a soft creaking sigh that mingled with the distant gusts of wind. Sarapen and Reys exchanged a look that was rich with unspoken resolve. The decoy was set. Their diversion was complete. Now, all that remained was to retreat from this illusory sanctuary and disappear into the darkened woods, their hearts burdened by both hope and the heavy knowledge that danger was never far behind. As they prepared for their next move, the eerie, haunting beauty of the cabin shone as a transient monument to their resourcefulness, a brief moment of human ingenuity in a landscape ruled by uncertainty. The decoy was not a safe haven, but it was their best chance to outsmart the relentless forces hunting them, to carve out a fragile, temporary reprieve from a world that had proven itself unforgiving time and again. And in that brief interlude of illusion, there was a promise that even in the return. Shadows linger. After the diversion, the decoy had worked, at least for now. With the false safe haven set up behind them, Sarapen and Reys began their cautious journey back to the clinic. The forest, still alive with the whispers of the storm, carried them along a narrow path now softened by the glow of early dawn. Each step retraced their escape, a silent procession marked by the heavy crunch of snow underfoot and the measured rhythm of their synchronized breathing. The woods, once a treacherous expanse of looming danger, now seemed to bear a strange, reflective calm. The moon had all but vanished behind a slowly brightening sky, its silver luminescence giving way to a hesitant golden light that filtered through the dense canopy. Yet the transformation was bittersweet. The relative safety of the cabin had provided a brief respite, a hopeful illusion. But as they advanced deeper into the familiar woods, a lingering dread clung to every shadow and every rustle, as if the night's perils were following in silent pursuit. Reys led the way with unwavering focus, his eyes flitting from branch to branch as if searching for any sign that the hunters might be on his trail. Although his face was set in a mask of determination, a hint of exhaustion surfaced in the lines of his jaw and the weariness in his gaze. Sarapen stayed close, her own mind racing with thoughts of what might still lie in wait. The arduous trek back to the clinic was punctuated by long silences, each of them filled with reflections on the delicate balance between hope and fear. At times, the forest's eerie calm was shattered by the sudden snap of a twig or the distant cry of a nocturnal animal. These brief disturbances sent quick, jarring pulses of adrenaline through their veins, a stark reminder that the danger they sought to evade was never truly far away. In one such moment, Sarapen paused and pressed her hand against a frost-laden tree, her breath visible in the cold air. She closed her eyes for a split second, allowing herself to feel both the relief of temporary victory and the oppressive weight of uncertainty. "We're not safe yet," she thought, the mantra echoing silently in her mind. The path gradually led them back to the familiar vicinity of the clinic. Yet, as they neared the structure, a peculiar tension settled over the scene. The once comforting silhouette of the clinic now appeared altered, a silent, somber reminder that what once felt like a secure haven had transformed into a stronghold under siege. The windows, though still offering a glimpse of the interior's warm light, seemed to shimmer with an unspoken promise of vigilance and of threats that might now lie closer than before. Reys glanced at Sarapen as they reached the threshold, his eyes reflecting a mixture of cautious hope and underlying dread. "We made it back," he murmured softly, his voice carrying a weight that belied the simplicity of the statement. His words were meant to reassure. Sarafen hesitated at the door, one hand poised to push it open, her mind laden with conflicting emotions. There was relief, a fleeting sense of triumph at having outwitted the hunters long enough to return safely. Yet at the same time, there was an inescapable melancholy. Each step toward the clinic seemed to drag with echoes of the past night's terror, and the realization dawned on her that their temporary diversion had come with a price. The world they were re-entering was not the same world they had left behind. It now bore the scars of their frantic escape and the ever-present threat of intrusion. Inside, the clinic's interior felt both familiar and alien. The quiet hum of the heater and the steady ticking of the old clock offered a semblance of normalcy, yet every object, a chair, a stack of files, even the outdated medical supplies, appeared to whisper of the night's chaos. It was as though the air itself was charged with a tension that threatened to erupt at any moment. Sarafai's eyes met Reys's once more as they crossed the threshold into the transformed space. In that brief, silent exchange, both acknowledged the fragile hope they clung to, a shared resolve that, despite the lingering dread, they would face whatever came next together. "We're not completely out of the woods yet," she said softly, a note of resolve underlying her weary tone. "But at least for now, we've bought ourselves some time." The weight of those words settled over them like a heavy mantle. In that quiet, transformed sanctuary, each minute carried the duality of respite and threat. The familiar walls of the clinic now served as both protective barriers and stark reminders of the encroaching darkness that lurked outside. And yet, amid the faint, steady light and the soft, measured sounds of routine, there was a spark, a delicate promise that together they could rebuild their defenses, prepare for the inevitable next storm, and perhaps, in some small way, reclaim a semblance of normalcy. As they began to settle into their quiet roles once more, a brief respite in the eternal struggle for survival, the lingering emotions of the journey back mingled with cautious optimism. The escape had been fraught with danger, and the route back was a somber reminder that safety was always transient. Yet, in that moment, bound by silent promises and the weight of shared secrets, Sarapen and Reys stood together at the precipice of a new chapter, one where every echo of the past and every shadow of uncertainty. Dawn's revelation. A new day. Unanswered questions. As the last vestiges of the night yielded to the first light of dawn, a fragile calm enveloped the world outside the clinic. The cold, stark daylight spilled over the horizon, bathing the snow-clad landscape in an almost unbearable clarity. It was a moment of paradox, a new day with all its promise of renewal, yet marred by the heavy residue of unanswered questions and lingering threats. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The once dim, oppressive shadows gave way to soft, pale sunlight filtering through frosted windows. Yet even as the room filled with light, the chill of the night's terror still clung to the corners like a stubborn ghost. Amid the clinical quiet of the morning, Sarapen stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the awakening world beyond. In that silent pause, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Reys. His posture, though still reserved, seemed somehow less guarded. For a fleeting instant, vulnerability flickered in those enigmatic golden eyes that had so long been his shield. Sarafen's thoughts swirled as she contemplated the contradictory nature of the day. The daylight was unforgiving, sharp and clear, as if it had the power to cut through all deception. Yet, amidst that rigidity, there was an undeniable warmth in the way Reys' expression softened when their eyes met. It was a tenuous bridge between the harsh realities of their shared plight and the human desire for connection that had flourished during the long, perilous night. Her mind drifted to the events that had unfolded in the hours of darkness. The adrenaline, the desperate dash through the snowy wilderness, and the calculated illusion of the Decoy cabin had all seemed to vanish, replaced by the stark light of morning. And yet, the questions they had tried so hard to keep at bay re-emerged, with the rising sun. Sarapen wondered aloud. Do you feel it too? That slight shift, as if the night's horrors have given way to something uncertain? Her voice was barely more than a whisper, carrying a mixture of curiosity and unease. Reys remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line, where the soft blue of dawn met the last remnants of the dark forest. Finally, he murmured, "There's clarity in daylight, but also more to uncover. The night revealed only fragments of our past and hints of the future." His words, though simple, resonated deeply within her, stirring a blend of hope and trepidation. Outside, the world had transformed into a frozen tableau of silvery light and fresh snow. Icicles glittered from eaves like shards of crystal, and every breath formed a small mist that dissipated as quickly as it appeared. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, offering a temporary reprieve from the chaos of the previous night. Yet, in that calm, Sarapen could not shake the feeling that the day would bring. With measured steps, she moved to tidy the clinic's small workspace. Her hands, still faintly trembling from the night's exertions, began arranging patient files and supplies with a methodical precision that mirrored her internal need for order. But as she worked, she found her eyes repeatedly drawn to Reys. There was a quiet resilience in his demeanor, a subtle change in the set of his shoulders, a softness in the way he looked at her, that hinted at a transformation sparked by the crucible of their shared ordeal. The barriers he had so carefully constructed seemed to have yielded, however slightly, to the morning light and the honest vulnerability it forced upon him. In a rare moment of introspection, Sarapen paused by the window and allowed herself to simply observe. This new day brings clarity, yet it also magnifies the questions I've been too afraid to ask fully. The memory of the night's terror, the calculated decoy, and the raw revelations of his mysterious past all swirled together like the delicate snowfall outside. It was a fragile tapestry, one where every thread of relief was interwoven with strands of lingering dread. She contemplated the daunting possibility that the hunters might still be tracking Reys, that the secrets of his extraordinary healing and troubled history were far from resolved. And yet, amidst that uncertainty, there was a palpable sense of connection, a warmth, a silent promise that in the face of a world that could be as brutal as the biting cold, they had each other. It was a bond forged in the crucible of shared danger and tempered by the unspoken truths that each carried within. Sarapen's gaze met Reys's once more, and for a few suspended seconds, they communicated without words. In that silent exchange lay both the hope for a brighter future and the bittersweet knowledge that the night's revelations were only the beginning. There was a spark in the darkness, a glimmer of understanding that perhaps, together, they could confront not just the external threats, but also the internal demons that haunted them both. As the full light of dawn washed over the clinic, the lingering chill of the night gradually receded, replaced by a cautious optimism that illuminated the edges of their uncertainty. Sarapen resolved to uncover the mysteries that bound them, knowing that every answer might only raise more questions, but also that the pursuit of truth was a journey worth taking, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. And with that silent, determined promise, a new day began. Brewing intimacy, quiet moments in the clinic. In the wake of the chaos and harrowing escape, a quiet intimacy began to unfurl within the humble confines of the clinic. The early morning air, now softened by the gentle glow of daylight, brought with it a sense of calm that allowed the frazzled edges of tension to relax, if only slightly. Amid the steady hum of routine and the lingering aroma of antiseptic, Sarapen and Reys found solace in the small, shared rituals that marked a new day. At a worn wooden table near the window, a battered coffee maker hissed softly as it brewed the first pot of coffee. The rich, earthy aroma soon filled the space, mingling with the faded scent of old paper and the subtle tang of disinfectant. Sarapen moved with measured grace, pouring the steaming liquid into 2 chipped mugs. As the coffee's warmth spread through her fingers, she caught Reys' gaze across the table. For a moment, the tension of the night receded into the background, replaced by the unspoken comfort of shared routine. "Coffee?" she offered, her tone gentle and inviting, a stark contrast to the rigid determination that had defined their previous exchanges. Reys accepted the mug with a slight nod, his fingers brushing hers ever so briefly. In that fleeting contact, there was an affirmation of mutual dependence, an acknowledgement that even in the midst of danger, there lay the desire for connection. They settled into quiet conversation, their dialogue soft and interspersed with long, reflective pauses. "It's funny," Reys remarked as he took a slow sip, "how a simple cup of coffee can make you feel like you're alive again." His voice, usually measured and reserved, carried a trace of wistfulness that drew a small smile from Sarapen. "I think it's the aroma," she replied, meeting his eyes. "It's like a promise of warmth and a reminder that even in dark times there's a little light to be found." The soft clink of a spoon against a mug punctuated their exchange as they savored the quietude. Outside, the storm had receded to a distant murmur, leaving behind an air of fragile hope. Within the walls of the clinic, the routine of organizing supplies became a shared project, a task that allowed both of them to channel their lingering anxieties into something tangible. Sarapen's methodical arrangement of files and medical kits seemed to echo her inner need to re-establish order, to rebuild a sanctuary piece by piece. Reys assisted with a gentle efficiency, occasionally offering a wry comment that lightened the mood. "You're remarkably good at this," he observed as he carefully placed a box of bandages on a shelf. "I wouldn't have guessed you had such a tender side beneath that steely exterior." Sarapen shot him a playful look, a hint of humor in her eyes. "Well, when you spend your nights dodging danger and healing wounds, you learn that sometimes a little tenderness goes a long way," she replied, her voice warm and teasing. Their laughter, though soft, wove into the fabric of the clinic's morning, a subtle melody that spoke of an unanticipated closeness. Between the rustling of paperwork and the gentle drip of a leaky tap, the ambiance was charged with an understated intimacy, the kind that... As they continued their shared tasks, Sarapen's thoughts meandered through memories of past solitude and the walls she had built around herself. Yet, here in the quiet company of Reys, those barriers seemed to soften. His presence was a steady anchor amidst the ever-changing tides of uncertainty. In quiet moments, when the clinic's silence became almost palpable, she found herself drawn to his guarded eyes, where hints of vulnerability flickered like fragile candlelight. There was something in the way he carefully listened, in the way his gaze lingered as if he was weighing every unspoken word. It was a mutual, wordless confession that each of them was tired of isolation, that they both longed for a sense of belonging, even in a world that had become increasingly hostile. At tea, one point while stacking boxes in the supply room, Reys paused and looked at Sarapen, his expression thoughtful. "I never expected to share these moments," he confessed softly. "But somehow, even in all this chaos, I find a strange comfort in them." His tone, laced with both surprise and genuine sentiment, resonated deeply with her own heart. Perhaps that's what we need. The affirmation that amidst the danger, there's still something worth holding on to, she murmured, her words a delicate blend of vulnerability and resolve. The gentle cadence of their routine. Coffee shared in quiet. Camaraderie, supplies methodically organized by mutual effort, formed the backdrop for a slow-building bond. In these small moments, where the clinic's stark clinicality gave way to personal warmth, Sarapen and Reys discovered a resilient glimmer of hope. It was a truth that had been buried under layers of fear and survival instincts, now emerging, through the simple act of human connection. As the morning advanced, the distant threat of the night receded further into memory, replaced by the promise of a new day. A day that, while still uncertain, held the possibility of healing not just wounds but hearts. And in the silent, understated intimacy of the clinic, both began to realize that even amidst relentless danger, there was a sanctuary. The unsettling calm. Suspense returns, just as the morning began to lull them into a fragile sense of normalcy. The uneasy silence in the clinic was shattered by an intangible tension that crept back in like a shadow at dusk. Reys stood by the window, his eyes scanning the gray expanse beyond with a vigilance that betrayed his calm exterior. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying with it a low murmur, a whisper of movement, as if the dark forces that had haunted them earlier were making their presence known once more. Inside, Sarapen worked at the supply counter, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had tasted a brief respite in the quiet rituals of shared coffee and routine tasks. Yet deep within her heart, the dread of uncertainty clawed persistently. Every time she glanced toward Reys at the window, she saw his steely gaze fixed on the shifting shadows outside, a silent alarm that the calm they had so desperately clung to was unstable, precariously balanced on the edge of something far more ominous. "Do you see anything?" she asked quietly, almost to herself, as she adjusted a stack of neatly organized files. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the inner turmoil she struggled to contain. Reys didn't turn to answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the murky silhouettes that danced between the trees, as if trying to extract a shape from the darkness. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and laced with tension. "I caught movement, a flash out there, but I can't be sure," he murmured. His words sent a shiver racing down her spine, mingling with both the residual warmth of their earlier intimacy and the returning chill of the impending threat. As if to punctuate his words, a sudden gust of wind rattled the clinic's window panes, and the soft hum of the heater momentarily faded into a haunting silence. Sarapen's internal alarm spiked. The delicate balance of the moment was collapsing. The protective routines of the morning now seemed fragile, and the specter of the hunters loomed once again, vivid in her mind. Reys moved to stand closer to her. His hand brushed lightly against hers, a touch that held a silent urgency, as if conveying that they had to face this unknown danger together. "We can't afford to let our guard down," he said firmly, his tone a mixture of resolve and a hint of vulnerability that came only when the stakes were highest. Her gaze met his, and in that brief exchange the tension was palpable. "I know," Sarapen replied, her words steady, even as she fought to calm the knot of anxiety that tightened in her stomach. "But it's like every time I think for a moment we have some peace, the shadows of the night remind us that we're not out of the woods yet." Her remark was delivered with a wry edge, a defiant whisper against the encroaching dread that simmered just beneath the surface. Outside, the world remained unpredictable, a churning mass of wind, rain, and shifting darkness. A branch snapped. Nearby, its sound abrupt and jarring, sending a ripple of adrenaline through both of them. For a heartbeat, the clinic was consumed by an almost unbearable silence. Sarapen's eyes flicked to the door, half expecting it to swing open with the arrival of unwanted visitors. The entire space seemed to hold its breath, suspended in that narrow moment between calm and calamity. Reys's eyes narrowed as he edged toward the window again, his face taut with concentration. "They're out there," he whispered, barely audible over the drip of rain against metal. His voice was both a warning and an admission, a confirmation that the threat was not a relic of the past, but a looming shadow set to intrude upon their fragile sanctuary. Inside the clinic, the mundane details of their previous morning now felt irrelevant against the backdrop of this renewed uncertainty. Every tool on the counter, every file on the shelf, seemed to bear silent witness to the struggle that lay ahead. Sarapen's mind raced with possibilities and strategies, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Each beat was a reminder that every second of quiet could be the calm before another storm, a storm that might shatter the fragile peace they had just begun to rebuild. They exchanged a few more hushed words, their dialogue a mix of tactical planning and raw, unfiltered emotion. "We need to be ready to move, immediately," Sarapen insisted, her eyes scanning the darkened corridor, as if expecting an intruder to materialize at any moment. Reys nodded, his thoughts hidden behind the steady resolve of his expression. "If they make a move, we must act without hesitation," he agreed, his voice resolute. In that charged atmosphere, the unspoken question loomed large. What happens next? The threat of the hunters, once a distant rumor, now pressed ever closer, with every rustle in the night and every gust of wind that rattled the windows. The clinic, their temporary fortress, pulsed with the energy of impending action, a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. As the minutes stretched into an excruciating eternity, Sarapen and Reys stood side by side, their shared determination a small beacon amid the overwhelming uncertainty. In that suspended moment, when the world outside seemed to pause, and the only sounds were the faint echo of the storm and their own steady breaths, the question remained, hanging in the air like a challenge. And then, in one heart-stopping second, a figure emerged from the darkness beyond the window, a shape moving with deliberate purpose. The silence shattered into a cacophony of hurried whispers and the palpable rush of adrenaline. In that split moment, everything they had The final stand. Confronting the inevitable. The air was thick with anticipation, every heartbeat a resounding drum of determination and fear. In the dim interior of the clinic, Sarapen and Reys moved with purposeful urgency, preparing for the confrontation they knew was inevitable. Their sanctuary had transformed into a makeshift war room, a space where every file, every tool, every whispered word carried the weight of survival. The steady hum of the heater and the persistent ticking of the clock formed a somber symphony, underscoring the gravity of the moment. Sarapen's hands moved swiftly, yet methodically, as she gathered the essential supplies. A first aid kit carefully checked and rechecked, a couple of sturdy flashlights, and even a well-worn map that detailed the terrain beyond the clinic's fragile walls. Each item was a piece of their tactical puzzle, a small promise that they would not be caught unprepared. With every deliberate step, she felt the raw surge of adrenaline mixing with an unyielding resolve, a determination honed by nights of terror and long hours spent questioning fate. Reys, meanwhile, stood watch by the window, his golden eyes scanning the dark horizon with an intensity that spoke of both vigilance and a deep, unspoken promise to keep her safe. His stance was unyielding, shoulders squared against the invisible weight of danger, as he meticulously secured the room's few makeshift defenses. He adjusted a heavy metal grate over a lower window, ensuring that no unwelcome hand could pry, their sanctuary apart. Every motion was fluid, executed with the precision of someone who had lived through too many close calls to leave anything to chance. In the quiet moments before the final stand, a charged silence settled between them. A silence heavy with unspoken promises. Sarapen paused, her fingers briefly resting on the cool surface of a counter, and met Reys's gaze. Without a word, their eyes communicated the depth of their loyalty and the mutual understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. It was a wordless covenant forged through the shared crucible of danger and hardship. Their expressions, etched with both determination and vulnerability, painted a portrait of defiant love amid adversity, a love that had grown resilient in the face of relentless threats. "Ready?" Sarapen's voice was soft yet resolute, carrying the weight of a final decision. Reys' response was barely a whisper, but it held everything that needed to be said. Always. The exchange was brief but potent, a spark that illuminated the space between them for a fraction of a second, enough to renew their courage. Their tactical preparations continued in a flurry of measured activity. Sarapen reorganized a makeshift stockpile of provisions near the door, her mind racing through strategies and escape routes. On the map sprawled out before them, lines were drawn like battle plans, routes to the Decoy cabin, alternative paths through the dense woods, and even a contingency for a swift retreat into the hidden network of nearby trails. Each stroke on the paper was a declaration that they would not succumb to fear. Outside, the storm had calmed to a foreboding drizzle, but every droplet, every whisper of wind still carried a chill that was as much emotional as it was physical. The world beyond the clinic remained fraught with uncertainty, a realm where shadows shifted and danger lurked at every corner. This knowledge only heightened the tension inside, where the impending confrontation with the hunters felt like the culmination of every lingering nightmare. Reys and Sarapen worked side by side, their actions synchronized in a silent, potent dance of survival. At one point, while tightening the final bolt on a makeshift barricade, Sarapen's hand brushed against Reys's. It was a fleeting moment charged with the warmth of shared resolve, a subtle reminder that their connection was as vital as any physical defense they were assembling. "We've come too far to falter now," she murmured, the words imbued with both tenderness and fierce determination. Reys responded with a steady nod, his eyes saying all the things his voice could not, the promise that he would never let go, that he would stand with her against the darkness. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and every shadow, every rustle, seemed to whisper of the imminent arrival of the hunters. Outside, distant headlights flickered in the gloom, and an almost imperceptible murmur of voices drifted through the air, a prelude to a confrontation that would test their courage and their bond. The tension was electric, setting their nerves on edge while their hearts pounded a synchronized rhythm of defiance. As they took one last look over their fortified sanctuary, a profound silence fell over the room, a moment of calm before the storm of action broke over them. The clinic was no longer just a place of refuge. It had become a battleground where loyalty and love faced down the encroaching darkness. Every measure they had taken, every plan meticulously charted, was now a shield against the inevitability of conflict. In that final, breathless moment, with fear and determination intermingling in the charged air, Sarapen and Reys braced themselves for what was to come. The hunters were out there, lurking just beyond the fragile boundaries of their sanctuary, and the final stand was imminent. Their unspoken pact, forged in the crucible of shared peril, was all that now mattered, an enduring beacon of hope and defiance on the eve of the ultimate confrontation. What would happen next remained uncertain, but together, Epilogue. A bond, forged in darkness, in the quiet aftermath of the night's brutal struggle, as the first rays of a hesitant sunrise crept through the clinic's frost-adorned windows, Sarapen and Reys found themselves enveloped by a reflective, almost sacred calm. The chaos of the past hours, the desperate dash through the woods, the meticulous decoy that blurred the line between illusion and reality, and the ominous whispers of the hunters, had gradually retreated into the background, leaving in its wake a landscape bathed in soft morning light and heavy introspection. They sat together on a battered wooden bench near the doorway of the clinic, the remnants of their hurried fortifications and scrupulous preparations serving as silent monuments to their will to survive. The room, though still echoing with the ghostly ticking of the clock and the low hum of the heater, now resonated with a new kind of energy, one that was less fearful and more resolute. Sarapen's eyes, usually guarded and focused, shimmered, with traces of vulnerability and hope. Reys' normally inscrutable golden eyes, too, now held a quiet warmth that spoke of shared pain and an unspoken promise. Reflecting on the tumultuous journey they had endured, Sarapen's mind swept over every moment. The harrowing escape from the relentless storm, the eerie solitude of the woods, the painstaking construction of a decoy that had diverted peril, and the torrid clashes of fear and fleeting tenderness that had slowly and inevitably begun to bind them together. Her heart swelled with the weight of all those experiences, the unexpected intimacy that had emerged amidst the chaos, the subtle flirtations and the quiet moments of mutual dependence, and the fierce, silent vow to face whatever darkness might come next. Reys, ever by her side, offered a brief, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of a deep bond forged in circumstances that demanded sacrifice and strength. "We've been through hell and back," he murmured, his voice low but steady. "And yet, here we are, still standing together." His words resonated not only as a testament to their shared ordeal, but as a pledge that, despite the looming battles and unrelenting dangers, their connection would remain unbreakable. Sarapen reached out and gently took his hand, their fingers interlocking in a gesture that was both tender and defiant. In that touch, there was the promise of loyalty, a shared conviction that they would shield each other from the darkness that had once seemed all-consuming. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we face it side by side." Her words, soaked with both hope and the bittersweet scars of their past, filled the heavy silence in the room with their quiet conviction. Outside, the world was slowly waking. The cold, stark daylight revealed a landscape that looked both harsh and pristine, a fresh canvas on which new challenges would soon be inscribed. The memory of the night's terror lingered in the crisp air, a reminder that the battles they faced were far from over. Yet, amid that uncertainty, there was also a promise of renewal. The soft glimmer of the rising sun cast long shadows on the ground, shadows that seemed to merge with the darkness of the past, while simultaneously heralding a new beginning. Their shared journey, marked by moments of palpable tension and quiet intimacy, had altered them in ways both visible and subtle. Sarapen's pragmatic determination, which once fortified her against the unpredictability of the world, now blended with a gentler, more introspective side, one that could embrace hope amidst despair. Likewise, Reys' hardened exterior had softened just enough to reveal the tender, resilient. In those final moments of reflection, as they sat together in the warming glow of dawn, they both understood that their future was shrouded in mystery. The hunters were still out there. The world beyond remained a precarious dance of danger, and beauty, and many questions lingered in the echo of every memory. Yet the bond they had forged in the crucible of darkness was a beacon, a quiet, unwavering promise that no matter how deep the shadows or how relentless the storm, their love and resilience would endure. The clinic, once a mere bastion of medical order, had transformed into a symbol of their survival, a sanctuary built not only of bricks and determination, but of an intimate connection that defied the isolation of the world around them. As the sun ascended higher, its light growing bolder and more assertive, Sarapen and Reys rose together, ready to step into the unknown, with hearts intertwined and spirits emboldened by the trials they had survived. In that transcendent moment, as the morning carried away the remnants of the night's fears, a soft promise lingered in the air, a promise that even in the depths of darkness, there would always be a light capable of transforming pain into hope, solitude into solidarity, and survival into the unbreakable bond of love.